Morning.
Morning.
Everybody hear me okay? Good. So I'm getting a little bit of an echo from the mic. So my name is Mark Thompson. I'm an assistant professor at the College of New Jersey's Interactive Multimedia program.
And I'm Emily Kroll. I'm director of the college's art gallery and also the Sarnoff Collection, which is a small museum on the campus.
And Emily and I are going to be presenting today a case study about the results of an ongoing program that we've got going at the College of New Jersey, where students in the Department of Interactive Multimedia are partnering with regional museums to develop interactive exhibit prototypes. The program's in its third year, and we've successfully produced over a dozen interactive exhibits, many of which have been integrated into the permanent collections of our partner museums. The program consists of an exhibit design class in fall, followed by an optional public student showcase the following semester. Some of the benefits we've observed to date include our partner museums being able to inexpensively explore new approaches to interpreting their collections with the option of developing the best solutions further. And they're also able to develop a new talent pool from which they can hire and gain new forms of community engagement and extend their educational outreach. Students, on the other hand, are able to gain hands-on experience working with museum collections and creating interactive exhibits with emerging technologies, and they become familiar with the functions and processes of real-world design studios. And the community at large gains increased knowledge of our partners, the partner museums, their collections, and our university.
So I'm sort of speaking on behalf of the museum, and for the museums, which this is really targeted at small and under-resourced museums, or even a department within a museum that doesn't have perhaps the resources. And there's really very little that's asked of the museum. There's no financial requirement. There is some staff requirement. The way that it's worked the last 2 years, the staff meets with the students twice at the beginning of the semester to talk more generally about collections, perhaps a history of the collection, a little bit of context for the collection, and then to give some information about the specific exhibition or the specific objects that they would like the students to work on. The staff then meets with the students sort of at midterm time, in the middle of the semester, to give feedback on their evolving projects and to try to steer them in the right direction. And then, of course, at the end of the semester, final exam time, the museum staff meets with the students to see their final projects in action. And also recently, we have added a blog so that the museum staff can directly comment and give feedback on projects throughout the semester.
From the students' perspective, students pursue 2 tracks of study concurrently through the first half of the semester. First, they're meeting with museum personnel to learn more about the museum, its collection management practices, the object files, and to learn more about the exhibit space. And concurrently to that, they're also studying and doing a survey of emerging technologies and their use in museum settings. After midterm, students form teams and iteratively develop their prototypes with regular feedback from the museum staff, their classmates, and myself and advisors like Emily. We also incorporate field trips and guest speakers into the program, and students in particular gain additional insights through a couple of field trips, one to a regional art museum, and secondly to a regional science or children's museum. And we also invite guest speakers, local exhibit design professionals, in order to discuss practical real-world considerations when working with specific technologies and techniques. So a little bit more about our program at the College of New Jersey, the Interactive Multimedia Department. We're an undergraduate program in the School of Arts and Communication, and we've currently got about 140 students enrolled. And students receive foundational training in digital media, interactive computing, writing, web and mobile design, and then are able to choose a focus and pursue advanced training in animation, game design, web and mobile app development, physical computing, interactive music, and exhibit design. The program culminates in a senior capstone project. So this is just a photo of some of the students working on a project, an Oculus Rift project with one of our instructors.
So the actual first 2 years of the project took place in the Sarnoff collection. And just a little bit of background, it is a collection of about 6,000 artifacts that deal with the history of communication and electronics in the 20th century. It's named after David Sarnoff, who was the chairman of RCA for many, many decades. So it is concerned mostly with the history of television, radio, early computing. When the collection came to the college in 2010, it was actually completely uncatalogued. We cataloged it, digitized it, and actually got it out on the web, and then began to develop an introductory exhibition. The introductory exhibition did not have any media in it or technology, and the reason for this was twofold. One, we didn't have the money, but two, also, we knew that we had this interactive multimedia department at the college, and so it was a great opportunity for students to work directly with the collections on projects. So we're the prime example of an under-researched and under-resourced museum.
But despite that, Emily was able to put together this beautiful space, and you can see there are some great objects, in particular photographs, and some of the original pieces that were developed, color TVs, radios, so on and so forth. Wonderful job with very, very little resources and very, very little research. Behind this yellow wall, there's actually a study center where we conducted some of our classes. And the results were pretty impressive. After that first year, in 2013, the students did such a great job that we scheduled a student showcase the following February. Of the original 8 projects developed in the class, 7 actually participated in that showcase. And of those 7, 5 were actually contracted over summer to finish their projects for inclusion in the permanent exhibit.
When you say contracted, were they paid?
They were paid. And Emily can talk to that a little bit later. So from this cohort, this first, here's just some example projects. This was a series of timelines that one group developed to be delivered over the web or on an iPad in situ. It was developed using Timeline.js. This was an augmented reality app that was developed using Erasma and Photoshop. If you remember seeing the exhibition space, there were a lot of photographs. Walk up with an iPad, and in a Harry Potter-esque way, they would start talking about what's going on in those photographs. This project was a video and game, not a video game, but both working together. The video was developed using Photoshop and After Effects. The game was developed in processing. Here's another augmented reality app developed using Meta.io and YouTube. So it's pulling content down off of YouTube in order to interpret the collection. This was a 3D first-person point of view walkthrough game, sort of like a scavenger hunt that was developed in Unity 3D. And the second iteration, which was the following year, following on the success of the first year, we held the class again. The course was updated to reflect advancing technologies and techniques, and some of the collection items were sort of de-emphasized in the syllabus to avoid any redundancy from previous work. And the results, again, were great. We had high enough quality to warrant another student showcase, public student showcase. Of the 7 projects, this time 5 participated. And here's from that cohort. This project was a virtual tour of the original Sarnoff labs over in Princeton, and it was developed using Oculus Rift and Unity 3D. These guys developed a mobile tour using iBeacons to trigger the content. It was developed using PhoneGap and Estimotes. This project was sort of a film restoration concept where the student hand drew the frames and used Premiere to assemble video documentary for kids about how electrons work in television tubes. This project, color TVs at the time used phosphors, 3 different colored phosphors, and they developed, using an Arduino controller, the ability for people to adjust the color levels, and they built a video to demonstrate this with using Premiere. So, which brings us to this semester, which we're about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the semester. This year we actually partnered with the New Jersey State Museum, and students will be developing prototypes for the Pretty Big Things and Civil War exhibits. And the results so far are great. We're on target with students having successfully completed the first half of the semester. One observation is that this time around there are 12 prototypes in contrast to the 8 and 7 that were done the previous 2 years. This could be a result of more students in the class. This time around we've got 16 students. Previous times we had 13 and 12. It could also be that the collection size at the New Jersey State Museum, which is a little bit bigger than Sarnoff, that could be part of it too. So that's our case study. Thank you very much. And any questions? Yes?
That was really great. But how do you said that the number of projects is not equal to the number of students.
Correct.
So how did the teams form, and how did they manage to find whatever curator is going to mentor them?
It's a great question. That first half of the semester where they're learning sort of the museum's perspective, the museum's mission, the object files, working with the curators, and they're also learning the technologies. We have them develop a vision document just for themselves, and then we have them present in midterms that vision document. And invariably, there's commonality between those, and so then those people will tend to aggregate. Just some people work alone, but the level of polish that they're usually able to accomplish is usually a little higher when you're working in teams. Emily, do you have a comment on that?
And in terms of working with the curators in both, I mean, at the Sarnoff collection, it's me and a curator. So there are not a lot of choices. And at the State Museum, we met with them. It's actually a huge museum. They have art, history, archaeology, and natural history. And it was their cultural history department that said they wanted to work with the students, and that's just one curator. So.
Yes.
What sort of timeline are the students working with exhibitions that are already installed? So the class, like, what's the timeline for the class proposal and the exhibition being installed? How does that all work?
Right. It does. So the students are using the conceit here is that we're a design studio and the museum is a client, and so we're working with existing exhibitions, and the idea is how could we explore the space of possible refinements to the existing space. And so the students are basically going out and creating prototypes that demonstrate how you could use interactive multimedia to enhance the existing interpretation. And so the showcase is basically, if the projects are well received, then we do the showcase where they actually go and in situ demonstrate this. And then if that goes very well and the attendees, which is the general public, really likes that, then the museum can choose to put in whatever additional resources are necessary to actually make that part of the permanent collection. Yes.
So how did that, as you said, midterm they present their idea papers or conceptual papers.
Right.
So it's about 4 weeks to actually do the implementation.
Yeah, it's and so the operative term is prototype.
Right.
They're usually pretty well. Emily, you can probably speak to this better.
Well, usually they have sometimes they're more advanced on the technology than the content.
Right.
And so that's where the museum staff tries to help. And in most instances, I think there's been maybe 1 or 2 prototypes done. In some cases, they've actually completely finished the video, completely finished the game. Like all sorts of college classes, some students are real go-getters and others don't quite do as much. But in all instances, there's been at least one augmented reality image, or one version of the technology that's finished by the end of the semester. And then in the case of the Sarnoff collection, I approached all of the students, asked if they wanted to finish their projects, and asked them to give me an estimate of how much time and how much it would, how much time it would cost. And they were paid basically at the sort of highest level student rate. And then Mark and I actually took their estimates and doubled them, because they, and it was then still, it was like $500. I mean, it was just tiny amount of money to get the projects finished.
You only doubled them?
It worked.
Very.
I hope.
Great to see it.
You too.
So can you say more about what level of intervention was required on the museum side before what the students proposed went public, versus how much what they made was ready to go when you guys first saw it?
Sure, that's,
Both from the content and the technology side. You've addressed it a little bit, but you can say more.
Gosh, it's hard to quantify it, but not a tremendous amount of time. I can't, the timelines were really in great shape. We were able to share them with volunteers and with a number of people to just, fact check things. And it really wasn't a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
And as with anything, if there or anything that's digital, if there's a mistake, it's not that hard to correct it.
yeah. And also, because of the iterative nature of the whole project, where there's regular contact points, so there's lots of opportunity for, nudging here, nudging there, making corrections to this. So by the time the semester's over and final presentations are done, the museum personnel are pretty much already familiar with what's being presented. So, yes, sir.
Sorry, I came in late.
That's okay.
Maybe I missed this, but I want to get back to the topic of cost. Emily, you said it didn't cost the museum very much. How about the college? Who funds the technology purchases?
Well, that's a really good question. Some of it we have a cage on the floor where a lot of the stuff is there. The Oculus Rift projects, for example, those kids had their own, so they were really into this stuff, and so a lot of it is what the iBeacons. I loaned a couple of those out, but these kids are doing this anyways for their program, and so they're basically they're taking things that they're learning in other classes and applying it to this particular user story or set of user stories, if you will.
Truly during the class part of the project, there is no financial output on the part of the museum. Obviously, if you want to go further and hire the students and buy some equipment, there are those costs. But during the class part, there really is no financial outlay for the museum.
Yes.
In the initial identification projects for the students, was there kind of guidance by the curatorial staff or kind of this would be particularly helpful, this is an area of need, or was it like a free-for-all?
There were certainly some guidance, and some students, really listened. Other students didn't so much. But certainly, at least half of the projects, I would say, were ended up, being directed towards areas where we really wanted more interpretation.
Okay. Thank you guys very much.
Hey, how are you? Good. Thanks for coming. Digital learning, and then I covered what you were talking about.
Institution
virtual
I
learning.
I was wondering if I could move these over.
Yeah, I'm in the education department.
With their mandates and everything, they're very helpful.
Mark and I work together on the late night.
However,
I read your
they're
article
very,
about
right?
the
And they don't.
docent.
Yeah,
It
arrived at my office this past Monday, so I'm trying to get it on the network there.
Okay.
But once it's up, we're going to start the process of
I've been trying to get over there.
Thank you so much for getting me help. Yeah, it's
Oh,
pretty cool
yeah,
stuff.
just
That's awesome.
reach out anytime.
They're the very early stages of getting
funding
I
and
had
assessing.
some-
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just
That's-
like an
that's
idea.
like-
And I'm teaching it. Yeah,
But it's much more valuable when you're
I don't know.
Yeah, they're like, I didn't have it.
Right, you would have to
Yeah, my number of contact. Okay, so I'll show.
The city of Saskatoon of all places,
Yeah,
and
you know, put
like,
training,
they're going through funding
training wheels
process
on
right now,
first,
but I'll
so it's
eventually
been
be
great
working
partnership
as a
between us.
consultant to bring
You
such
know,
a
this
program
semester,
here.
Right.
So,
the
yeah,
Interior
Santa
Design
Cruz,
Museum,
let's do it.
Yeah.
I
Who
think
else was
there's more
interested?
room for that sort of
Okay.
big,
Denver
big
would be
blow up, but they've been
Yeah.
great.
Was it their art museum or smaller?
No, that's what
Yeah.
one of the smaller
I
ones.
fall for both.
I'm teaching
Hi.
about like
How are you?
could it be something that all
Yeah.
and that's why I wanted to grab a bit more to
Yeah.
know about, you know, the guidance.
Certainly, I was
and
especially
how
because
it's on
it's
maybe
Chelsea with that.
selecting those.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ostensibly get funding.
So much to do.
From all
There's all
resources.
these visitors.
We're
and
starting
build
to do,
something.
like,
That's
kind of
largely, that largely
like,
falls
and
on
then
me.
fill in.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's how it was.
really,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
Okay.
Talking about the openness
point out what you-
Yeah,
what
no,
you-
we're really happy with the way it turned out.
So
Yeah.
they sort of,
So did you already
also
Oh, really?
Did you bring
I already talked about the app.
I'm
kidding. Now I'm gonna talk about the road in general.
Is it
You sure do. Okay.
Yeah, anyone who
All
wants to
sort of
come,
menu
let me
encoding
know.
towards, like a little dashboard.
They have a feed, like, have you been to like,
Okay, sure.
California?
There's an income and outward facing aspect to that.
How do you manage their
It's a great question, but,
And that is
yeah.
more or less using things that are orphanages and then networking around.
Yeah, we messed up and didn't realize anything. Rich is in charge, so I figured we should share data.
And are they going to need to like copyright images or do watermarks or things? That's their
Yeah.
So they can do that.
I hate it, but I just
Okay, cool, yeah.
And
Yes.
we're totally open to that. Our usage of this.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Good.
You're not posting work that's not yours.
Right.
We've played mediator before.
Yeah,
Staff
okay.
and said, oh, okay, well, we're happy to take this down.
So wait, are you
Let the
in
person
two
know.
different?
I was in the last one and now I'm in this
Oh
one.
my God, that's crazy.
Contact.
How convenient
Yeah, I
that it was
know,
scheduled
that's
in the
what I
same
was
place.
Totally, I grabbed your.
Nice to meet you in person.
Yes.
So I'll just connect with you.
Super, that'd be great.
I think it would be a really interesting way to take it into
Yeah,
the
well,
music
I'll
world.
grab you my card. Yes, and we do musicians on the site.
That's
But you could
cool.
totally have one or the other or both.
Yeah, I'll take your card for sure.
And we'll take this in. Yeah.
And yours is really interesting because we're about a year from opening, and I'm like, I was hoping you'd say something about timeline and when you started planning for this. So was the app available on like day one?
Yes.
Yeah.
We launched it maybe a week before we opened.
Okay.
Just because we were nervous about the app store and everything. But yeah, I mean, so I got there earlier than, like, I started working there 2.5 years before we opened because they thought they were opening earlier than we were, and there was construction delays. So we had a long time to kind of work on it and think about it, but then we thought and we thought and we thought and we thought, and then probably about a year ago we got like really serious.
Okay. So about a year.
And then
I'm gonna.
you know, we were doing that wire training, that was in the spring, and then they were building in the summer, and if we wanted to get all the features, we should have started
Earlier than that even.
but
And you do it all in the house, like you manage all, like an OS update, you're able to update, so your app
I
still works?
didn't develop the app.
Everybody.
We worked with Story to develop it. Just and then they have a CMS that we manage, and then I like project manage everything. So, hey guys, have you done it?
Yeah, okay.
Where is it?
There's a new OS update, your
what's
app's
the
not
deal?
working.
Yeah. What's the timeline? All right, checking in on the timeline.
Okay, so you, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it was just interesting because again, we'll be in the same boat.
Okay, so I have a quick AV question. Everything looks fine. And that is.
No, yeah, you mean yeah, I'm gonna talk about like not just the app. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about
Okay, yeah.
right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Because, anyway, you should plan your data structure.
Yes, so no, that's why I'm sticking around. So I'm interested to hear how you overall manage the visitor experience.
Oh, there's the two of you?
Yeah, okay.
If you need anything, I'm your volunteer for the room. If you need anything, Charlie, nice to meet you. This is you. All right.
Well, that's on my mind right there. There are good conversations about it. I'll be out of your way.
Okay, hello everyone. We, well,
Sure.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 10:15 session. A point of order, we just realized that there's been, our plan had been to have the presentations in the order that is opposite the order that's in Sketch at the moment. So I don't know if that means half of you want to get up and leave right now. But the plan would be to have actually Laura and Heather go, not Heather and Laura. Is that cool with everybody? If so, I will.
If you leave now, I won't take it personally.
Yeah. All right, so we'll give it another minute for people to straggle in, and then we'll begin with our introductions.
While we wait, would somebody mind talking into that mic on the table? I don't know if this is picking up well at all.
hello, hello. We have to get really close.
This one seems to work. It's a little quiet too, though.
Okay. Talk again, and then I turned it up.
Hello, hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, not mine.
Good Lord. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 10:15 session. We have a couple of interesting talks for you today from Laura Mann from Frankly Green and Webb and from Heather Hart from The Broad. I'm Ed Rodley. I'm your cheerful moderator this morning. What we'd like to do, if possible, since we have only 60 minutes, is to try to hold questions till the end. I know people like to try to duck in and out, so we'll try to leave room for like one or two really like burning focused questions if you have them, but otherwise, if we can save it all to the end so that everybody gets a chance to get through their presentation and hopefully whatever themes arise from both talks we can deal with at the end. Is that cool? So without further ado then, let me introduce Laura Mann from Frankly Green and Webb talking about service design. Yay!
Thanks, Ed. Okay, let's get the mic adjusted here so you can actually hear me. Can everybody hear me? Happily, it's a small room. Okay, cool. So, as Ed said, I'm from Frankly Green and Webb. We are a consultancy that works with cultural organizations to make smart decisions about their strategy, their use of digital technologies, mobile, and lots of other things. Sometimes we do strategy and research and evaluation. Sometimes we roll up our sleeves and jump into the implementation of projects. So, I, as my title suggests, I'm going to talk about service design today. Don't worry, I'll define that term. And in so doing, I'm going to give a couple of examples of some recent projects we've worked on, but I have sort of a case to make. There's been a lot of conversation at this conference about what we mean when we say digital. I think Ed framed the problem really, really well at Ignite. But I have to say that in my experience, when I hear people say digital, what they often mean is digital products. It's a shorthand. And success is a matter of picking the right digital products for your project. And indeed, innovation lies in picking the right digital products and then specifying them to the greatest degree possible in extremely detailed briefs that you then provide to suppliers. This approach is summarized by Marta de Vet of the Van Gogh Museum. We recently worked with them, and this is her describing their own initial perspective on their process. And from their perspective, specifying these digital products as precisely as possible was a way for them to both support innovation and minimize risk. As we all know, digital projects of all kind can be costly and risky. And I would say that this is a fairly common approach for many museums. But this leads to a sort of overfocus on products, is what I would say, and indeed sort of an assumption that innovation lies in new devices, more media, fancier features, more choice and personalization. Perhaps not exactly among the people in this room, but perhaps the stakeholders in your organization. Indeed, for some of our clients, the path to innovation is only through the use of new hardware. And at their peril, do they suggest anything else to their stakeholders? But what I want to argue today is that there actually isn't a lot of evidence to support the idea that implementing new hardware, new media, more options leads to either more successful digital efforts, happier visitors, increased take-up rate when it comes to mobile projects. We've done 8 studies on this, particularly with mobile in the last few years. Not one of them has shown that there's a correlation between fancy new stuff and usage, outcome, or impact with visitors. And just to provide one example, so at the National Gallery in London and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, visitor satisfaction with their mobile guides is the same, in spite of the fact that the National Gallery has what I think everybody would describe as a pretty outdated MP3 player. Nothing wrong with it, but not new or fancy. And the Met has relatively new iPod Touch devices. It seems to have had no impact at all on what the visitors think about the project or the program or their experience at the museum. So one of the things that I want to point to in thinking about products here is that one of the risks in starting from a product orientation is that we define the solution before we have a real sense of the problem. What exactly is the problem that we're trying to solve? And as Liz Ogbu pointed out so beautifully yesterday, oftentimes reframing the problem is the key to delivering real impact. And so I'm going to attempt to do a little bit of that here this morning. So what if, in fact, we focus less on designing products and more in thinking about services, not even digital services, just services? What services do our visitors actually need? And fundamentally, a service helps someone do something. I'll say more about that in a second. But first, I have the obligatory what is service design slide. It's a horribly long and relatively boring definition, but I got to provide it. But I'm gonna rephrase it in my comments, because I think that service design can be described as one aspect of a human-centered design approach that seeks to maximize the value and the delight for both visitors and organizations. And that's kind of my operating definition for the presentation today. And service largely is about helping someone do something. Might be helping them find their way around the museum, might be helping them make a deeper connection to paintings, but it puts the user, the visitor, at the center of the idea, helps us to see through their eyes, think in terms of their needs. And that sort of begs the question: when we start from visitor need rather than technology platform or product, how does that change what we make? And when we think in terms of service design, the outputs look a lot different than they do in terms of product design. In service design, a thing is not your only output. That's really crucial. So when I talk about the projects that I'm going to talk about in a minute, this is not a question of like bigger signage or like training your front of house staff to deliver a slightly different message to your visitors. Those things might be components in what I'm talking about, but this is not like we've got a great product, we just need to market it better. This is more fundamental than that in terms of where we start from in even conceiving of what the visitor need is and how we're going to solve it. And critically, as you've probably inferred from the bullet points on this slide, this is a cross-departmental process in a museum. This is not about the digital department or the education department. It's about virtually everybody. Now, we've been looking a lot at the government digital service in the UK recently, and they have a really nice phrasing around this, which is that their service doesn't start and end at their website. It starts by the search engine and ends at the post office in their case, but that their overarching principle is that they design services. They don't build websites. And I think we could learn a lot from that approach. Fundamentally, when you're talking about service design, what you're really talking about is looking across a user journey. And a user journey, a visitor journey, it includes both the digital and the non-digital, because it's part of a much larger continuum of experience for a visitor, and our digital offers are only one small part of that. And so our starting point in thinking about service design, broadly speaking, tends to be around this framing of attract, decide, use, and deliver value. One could use lots of different yardsticks, but this is one tool that we use. And so breaking that down, we've got, so who are the users of this service and what do they need? Do they understand what your offer is? Can they use it? And does it actually add value to their experience? And that's a framing that you could apply to lots of different things. But in this case, I'm going to present two different projects. One is a project that we did at the Met last year. Some of you may have seen me present some of this research data that we did for the Met at Museums on the Web in April. And just a side note, for those of you who are interested in like the full-on research data information about the Met, there's a published Museums on the Web paper about that audio guide evaluation that we did, because my purpose here is really to provide some select examples and not the full scope of that research. But the Met audio guide is, looking at it as an entire service really helped us understand and see both the opportunities and challenges in that program, and to understand and gain real insight into the kinds of experiences that visitors were having with the guide, and both what the experiences that the museum was trying to provide, and how those experiences were sort of being received and perceived by visitors. The Met's audio guide program, not surprisingly, is big. It's got 2,600 stops. There's 25 different trails and tours. It's available in 10 languages, and it serves 250,000 visitors a year. It's enormous. And but the principles that go into the factors around the Met's audio guide, I think, apply to all different size institutions. And that is that at the Met, they really wanted to use the possibilities of digital technology to offer maximum choice, maximum flexibility. You could come to the museum and get lots and lots of different things from your experience, and from their perspective, one of the great opportunities of the audio guide was to really pick and choose and customize the experience. It was lots of flexibility for the visitors, and I think the principle of that is great and right on. But how it actually played out in terms of visitor experience looks a little bit different. And the thing that I want to start with by explaining is that in doing our research with them, we looked first at who was actually taking the audio guide, who these people were and what their needs were. And just broad brushstroke, 80% of them are tourists. It's their first time at the museum in most cases. They don't know much about the museum or the collection. They're very motivated to make the most of their visit. They will seek out the audio guide, but they're looking for guidance on how to find the treasures, how to make their way around the museum, how to have the best experience possible. And so that's approximately 4 out of 5 people taking the audio guide. And so one of the things that the staff at the museum struggles to do, the staff behind that desk, very dedicated and enthusiastic audio guide folks, is that they struggle to explain the full scope of the offer. You can imagine how that might be the case, given what I just described about the audio guide. And so, because transaction times are important, and there's often a line at the desk, and they want to make sure that people understand how to use the device and what's on offer, but there's lots of people that they need to serve, and often they're doing this in multiple languages. So one of the things that became clear to us is that when we did some usability testing, was that visitors often have trouble making sense of what the offer is. And so there's no audio to this video. I'm just going to play the footage of, this is Natalie. She's looking for a highlights tour. We've asked Natalie to take a look at the audio guide and to figure out what she might do or where she might go with the audio guide if she wants to see the highlights of the museum. My video going to work there? Now, not surprisingly, this is what Natalie said. She had no basis on which to make a decision from the 5 different options offered on the highlights screen of the audio guide player. She had no idea why she might pick one over the other. And so in this gives us a good example of the situation in which, more choices may not be better. Because unless our visitors are equipped to actually make an informed choice about what the offer is, and is your staff in a position to explain the offer quickly and clearly when there's multiple people waiting in line? And is that something that visitors can pick up quickly, use the player quickly, understand how the offer meets their needs in terms of the kind of experience they're seeking to have at the museum, then you're going to end up with a lot of experiences like Natalie's. And not for lack of enormous investment, great enthusiasm, and terrific quality on the part of the museum's audio guide program. This is not a criticism of what the museum has produced. It's a mismatch between the needs of the visitors and and what's on offer. And my argument is that thinking in terms of service design allows you to investigate those needs in a more productive fashion. And the next story I want to focus on just briefly has to do with another moment in the visitor experience, and that has to do with the labels and what happens when you're standing in front of an object looking at audio guide labels. And the Met has 25 different thematic tours that they offer to people of all kinds. And so sometimes when you're standing in front of an object, there are 3 different labels with different codes on them. And when we asked visitors to take a look at this label specifically, I'm going to introduce you to Lucy, one of our usability testers. I asked her to take a look at this label, and I asked her to tell me how she understood the label and what would happen if she tried to access the stop with the large F next to it. And she said, oh, that's a tour I needed to have joined earlier. And I said, so could you access it now? And she said, I don't know. And I said, could you try? And she looked at her keypad and she said, there's no F. And then I said, well, try entering the number and see what happens. And she did. And she said, as you can see in the quote, I don't understand why there are 2 numbers, because she started listening to the stop with the F on it. I'll explain what that means in a second. And then she started listening to the other stop, and she said they sound the same. They just have different narrators. It turns out that the stop with the F next to it is a kids stop, family. It's listed as kids on the guide, actually. And so part of what I want to point out here is that usability is not just about what's on the device. And the user experience in this situation of the entire service, how they conceive of it and how they experience it, goes well beyond what we would consider product boundaries. And we've got to consider the entire shape of the service if we're going to address these kinds of questions. And so in the case of the Met, looking at innovation, success, what we're really talking about is simplifying the interface, limiting choices, improving labeling, things like that. This has very little to do with, say, adding GPS or new video content to their audio guide, which were 2 possible features being considered before we did the evaluation. And so moving right along, I want to go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And this is the development of a new service. We're in the middle of a 3-year collaboration with the museum to redesign their multimedia guide as part of the development of a brand new entrance to the museum. And it started with a pretty extensive research process. And we've launched a new multimedia guide. We're now doing some iterating and evaluating on that guide. So I'll give you a couple of snapshots into this. And the first thing that I just want to say about this is that in working on the guide, we boiled down the museum's objectives for the guide to these 2 things. The process had started with 8 pages of feature requirements. And through a collaborative working process that involved putting those feature sets aside, we involved a cross-departmental group of people in the development of a manifesto for the project. What was the multimedia guide going to be, and what was it not going to be? And what was the most important thing about the guide for people from all different departments across the institution that it do and that it not do? And that gave us a shared understanding of the top priorities for this project and how multiple departments might be involved in making that happen. We did that at the very beginning of the project, and we came down to improving the visitor experience and raising take-up rate. And our orientation here was really to design an experience and the services needed to support it rather than designing a product. And as part of that effort, we did a whole bunch of visitor research. And as part of that research, we asked them, visitors to the museum and elsewhere, about their experiences. We wanted to know about their experience at the museum. We didn't ask them what they wanted We didn't ask them what they liked or didn't like about audio guides or multimedia guides. We asked them about what mattered to them and what they did in terms of, we wanted to know about behaviors. We wanted to know about certain choices. We wanted to know about the last really fabulous experience they had either in a museum or elsewhere. And in that respect, we really used them as experts in their own experiences. And I hadn't heard the term either citizen expert or expert citizen until yesterday, but it really resonated with me because visitors were very clear about what mattered to them. We didn't ask them to tell us about features, but they were very clear about what was important to them. And in the case of the Van Gogh Museum, the average visitor is quite young. They might be hungover. They don't want to do a lot of work. They don't know a lot about Van Gogh, but they're quite excited to be at the museum. And out of that visitor research and the priorities of the museum, we came up with a sort of several key sort of principles for the guide, one of which was easy to use in every context. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Well, we zeroed in on a couple of important points in the visitor experience, and I'll share one of them with you before I run out of time, and that is the handout process. We identified that as a real pain point for both visitors and museum staff. It took a minute and a half to hand out each one of these guides. Now, when you have 16% of a million people taking the audio guide, a minute and a half is a really long time, especially in an institution that has enormous queuing challenges. And so the question was, how can we reduce the pain of this moment in time, and how can we cut the transaction time in half? Because that would enable them to support greater numbers of visitors, to distribute greater numbers of tours, because they were losing sales from the line because it was taking too long to actually hand out the guide. And so staff were anxious that they hadn't explained enough about the guide because there were lots of options. Visitors were struggling to understand what the offer was, and the whole thing was being conducted in people's second and third languages. So what we did was we organized the new guide around how can we make this transaction frictionless. And that played out across content, hardware, service, the human factors. So here's what the digital side of it looked like. It was pick your language, and it was what would you like to do today? We used the visitor's own words from our visitor research in naming the experiences. So I want to explore at leisure. When we asked people why they didn't take guides, they said, well, I want to explore at my leisure. I don't want to be tied to a tour. And so we tested, do you want the full experience? Do you want the full tour? No, that sounded like too much work. And so I want to explore at my leisure. That really resonated with people. The onboarding experience was actually taken out of the hands of the staff. And now you pick your language and the onboarding experience happens on the device. The staff are trained to reassure, to help instill confidence in the visitors, but not to instruct. And then the content itself is based on what we heard was important to visitors. How long does the tour take? What's on offer? What are they going to experience and do? It's based on their needs, not departmental structures at the museum or categories of art or other kinds of terminologies that might not be familiar to the visitors. And so in the case of the Van Gogh, what success really looked like was removing friction, choreographing the service, creating meaningful instructions, and our initial results are pretty positive. Handout time is down by 30% and take-up rate is up by 6%. It's not just the transaction time that's led to that. It's a whole series of other interventions all along the service process, from initial notification about what the museum is like on the website all the way through the experience in the galleries. But I give you one example of the impact that focusing on service design can really have in terms of improving the visitor experience and meeting some really clear museum objectives. Thank you very much.
So we have time for a couple of questions if people have them. Anybody? Bueller? All right, way in the back.
What have been the biggest challenges that you faced with clients implementing this, in terms of just working with museums, politics, budget, those types of things?
I think that the biggest challenge is a willingness to let go of a feature set, right? A shiny technology project, and engage in a process, because that's really what this is about. It's about doing the work to understand your visitors' needs and coming together as an organization cross-departmentally to understand how all the departments are going to row in the same direction to make a service that meets those needs. And honestly, I had a slide in here that I took out for length, like, innovation when it comes to this kind of stuff is boring. It's not sexy or flashy. And it's about iterating, it's about teams, it's about process. It's not about how big is that flat screen. And so and that can be a hard thing for museum stakeholders, particularly at the senior level, to let go of. It doesn't mean that you don't end up with interesting technology at the end. You might well, but that's not, going directly to that is not the path to innovation. And so there needs to be an institutional willingness to sort of suspend a level of disbelief and engage in a process, confident that that's going to get you to where you need to go in terms of innovation.
Yeah, and I think definitely what resonated for me was the fact that you were saying that the Van Gogh did a good job of knowing what they were going to do and what they weren't going to do, and that second half, in my own experience, has been the one that usually tends to fall off pretty rapidly, and that's the thing that allows you to maintain your focus, is being able to say, yeah, we're not doing that.
Right.
We're doing this
thing
instead.
Doesn't do that. Knowing what your thing doesn't do, your service, your product, whatever, is key.
Yeah, that short
Saying
circuits
no,
a lot
based
of
on
conversations.
data and based on an agreed mutual understanding across the organization.
Yeah. All right, anything else? All right, so let's move it then into our second talk, and Heather's going to talk about what that actually looks like at a gigantic scale from a blank slate. Heather Hart from the Broad Museum.
Hi, everybody. So, yes, I'm from the Broad, and I'm the director of IT there, and here's my email if you ever want to email me. I don't know. It's no secret. This is the museum, a little architecture porn for those of you who are into that. This is the museum as it looks as of this summer and still looks. We just opened to the public on September 20th, so we've been open for about a month and a half. We are located in downtown Los Angeles. This location was very strategic in that it's part of kind of a philosophical effort to create an arts district in downtown LA, to activate the street, to become more of a pedestrian district, and it goes together with the redevelopment of downtown Los Angeles in general. So we definitely feel sort of a need to contribute to that kind of egalitarian, populist kind of thing, to improve pedestrian traffic on the streets, to encourage people to go across the street to the Museum of Contemporary Art across the street, or to the Walt Disney Concert Hall, or there's several other cultural institutions in this area. So that's sort of a high-level overview of the Broad. We are a private collection museum. Our funder is Mr. Eli Broad, who is a billionaire businessman, and this is sort of like something that he does on the side. So he built this museum. The idea is it's a gift to Los Angeles. General admission is free. And being a businessman and notoriously frugal, we have a very lean staff and some other kind of quirky things as a museum, which I'll get into a little bit later. I am the director of IT, which is an all-inclusive title. Many of us at the museum wear many, many hats. So if you call the museum, chances are I will answer the phone. But I also design the network, maintain the email server, fix your printer, maintain the website, built the website, and kind of underwent this massive project where we tried to decide, you can build anything. What should it be? What should it look like? How do you craft a brand new visitor experience? And how do you're going to be impacting hundreds of thousands of people's lives every year, and, what statement do you want to make? So this is just the Broad by the numbers so far this year. Since we opened, we've had 100,000 visitors, 380,000 free online advance reservations. We're not calling them tickets. They're free advance communications. We have had quite healthy website traffic. we developed a mobile app which has had about 11,000 downloads, which is slightly lower than we would want, and so we're starting a big marketing push on that. I'll talk about that later. That includes 4 self-guided audio tours. We've installed many Bluetooth beacons, and those are kind of just all things that go into this overall idea of what we wanted the visitor experience to be like. We're a relatively small museum in terms of footprint. We have 50,000 square feet of gallery space. We're all in one building. You're not really going to get lost. It takes about an hour and a half. It's not like going to the Met. And then we have 2,000 objects in our collection, and so that's sort of interesting in that we actually could have, individualized content on every single piece. I can, if my integration doesn't work, I can enter each one of those in. It's not like we have 100,000 objects. So that's been really nice. And then we have 110 full part-time visitor services associates who are frontline staff, and then 30 full-time administrative staff who run this whole thing. So many of us are departments of one, sort of like me. When I joined the Broad in February of 2013, this is what it looked like. I should have known that it was a lie that we would be opening in a year. But at the time, that was the plan, and then construction delays kind of held us back. But it turned out to be good because when I started, this is what the Broad had in terms of technology and employees. So they were very small. They were transitioning from a private foundation to being a museum. I was the second employee that was really focused on the museum itself and the public and opening to the public. And I think to have a technology person in that position is sort of unique. But anyway, so this is what we had to work with. So we had a lot of work to do. And, we knew we had a lot to do, and we didn't really know where to begin. We didn't really have everyone hired. We didn't have a marketing person. We didn't have a communications person. We didn't have a programming person. We didn't have anything except really collections management, curatorial, and me. So we did start thinking, and the main goal from our funders' perspective is attendance. Numbers, exposing our art to the broadest possible public has long been our mission as an institution, and so he cares about raw numbers, attendance, and that is our primary mission. May not be the mission of all museums, but it is ours. And then 2, superb visitor experience is something that came from us, the staff, just as consumers of culture and consumers of the world in general. We knew that this would be an important part of making people come back, making sure people spread the word, and just making sure everyone had a nice experience. Number 3, the desire to have one authoritative database is sort of like a technology wet dream, but also was practical in that, we were going to need to do a ton of marketing and outreach. We were going to be very, needing to reach out, having lots of systems come together, and some of our staff had really traumatic experiences in past institutions with bunch of data silos that you can never bring together, and nobody knows what's going on, and education it operates completely independently of marketing, and it's just a complete mess. And then we wanted to build a solid foundation, so there were a lot of things we wanted to do, but we knew realistically we probably wouldn't get them all done. But the idea would be that we would build a platform which, when we did finally open and we saw what it was really like, and we realized that all these things we assumed weren't really the case, we would still have this solid platform where, that was supporting what we wanted to do and would be able to adapt and be iterated on so that we could change and react to what the visitors were wanting. So in getting started on this, we started with our physical kind of constraints. This is our lobby. And although it wasn't built when we started thinking about it, we knew that it was going to be beautiful and sculptural and confusing, and it's not really clear, where you're supposed to go, and the desk that they proposed was ugly and was cut out of the plan, and so there's no desk, there's nowhere to put a sign, there's nowhere to have a line. This is another view of it. So we had some real physical constraints we had to work around in terms of visitor experience, and we wanted to take those into account. Another thing is that we knew when we first opened we'd be quite crowded. Somebody accused me of taking this picture of just people walking on the street and trying to make it look like they were all coming to my museum. But in fact, they are all coming to my museum, and you can see the line here of people waiting to get in. So we knew we were going to have huge crowds when we first opened, and we were going to need probably to stagger entry capacity. We wouldn't be able to get everyone in, but that can be a really frustrating experience for people. We wanted them to, have a smooth experience, be able to come and get right in, and we knew probably the way we're going to need to do that is advanced reservations and time ticketing. And another benefit of that was that it would allow us to gather data on our visitors. Free admission is great, but free admission is also not so great in that you don't really know who's coming or even how many of them there are. And so we knew that we wanted to be able to, since attendance is our primary thing, we needed to be able to count them. We need an accurate count of how many people were coming. And we wanted to be able to market to them, to send them pre-visit, emails with instructions on how to come so that they would have a smooth experience, and then send them post-visit surveys. If they didn't attend, reach out to them, find out why not, get them to come back. So a lot of ideas on the marketing side were going into this. We had other practical considerations. As I mentioned, we're sort of an unusual museum. We have no fundraising, no membership, no volunteers, no docents, no separate education department, and indeed no departments at all. My director doesn't like the word departments. So it was, I don't know that you can use what I'm saying as what you should do in your museum, because you guys have to worry about all of these things or many of these things. And they may be, in your mission and really important. And for us, they just weren't. Another thing is that, since we're such a small staff, and we started as a small staff and everyone was hired as part of this big project to open the museum, that the staff that we have, we don't really have a problem working cross-departmentally. Me and it was the people who designed this was me and our director of marketing and communications and our deputy director, and we all just sit right next to each other and we just say, hey, what about this? And they say, yeah. So it wasn't like we had to rally the troops and sell them on this, we're going to design this overall experience and redesign all our systems, and this is how it's going to work. We benefited from the fact that we're small and we were all very focused on opening. So what we started by doing is envisioning the ideal interaction that a visitor would have with the museum. And so we knew that, we wanted it to be this as frictionless as possible. We wanted them to have a really positive experience. We didn't want to put security guards between them and the art. We wanted the art to really be front and center and to shine. And also the architecture to shine. So we weren't going to have flashy digital interactives in the gallery because, people are too distracted as it is. It's beautiful. They don't know what they're doing, and they want to just take selfies all the time. And then there are other things about this. Like I mentioned, we wanted to reach out to them before they visit. We want to reach out to them after they visit. We want to know their interests. So, if you visited and you have our app and you always listen to Jeff Koons and you hang out a lot near Jeff Koons and you just are the biggest Jeff Koons fan ever, you're at the right museum. But, we may want to then target, we have a talk with Jeff Koons, you may be interested in, we've noticed that that's your interest, so that we could start to segment our audience. And a lot of this is taking cues more from a for-profit or retail kind of a model. And so there's a lot that goes into this, but the idea is that we want to get people in easily, out easily, have a good time, everyone be friendly, no negative experiences, and keep track of them, know what they are, who they are, what they're doing. So how do we get there? We knew that marketing and communications would be central to this. We knew we wanted to have this one kind of database to rule them all. And then we wanted to try to highly automate everything, since we're a very small staff and, the director of marketing doesn't have a lot of time to go in and be transferring data between databases and doing data cleanup and all of this stuff. So we started having these meetings that we affectionately called What Works with What. and we had a big document. And at first we thought, okay, well, this is probably what we want. We already have this collection management system, and we'll use that data to drive the website. And then people, this data from our website, will go into our CRM system, and that'll talk to our ticketing, and we'll use the data from the ticketing and the CRM to send these marketing emails and communicate with our public. Then we were like, oh, well, we're not going to have any in-gallery didactics. For a while, we weren't even going to have labels. So we really need to provide, not everyone wants that, but some people really need guidance, particularly in Contemporary Art Museum. We're going to need to provide that in some way. So we've decided to build this app. Then we were like, oh man, there's no one to train our staff. What are we going to do? So we decided to build this training system that would basically take the place of like a docent training program in a traditional museum, where our visitor services associates, who we wanted to be really friendly and outgoing and knowledgeable and able to answer questions about the art and the architecture, because we weren't going to be able to have tours in the beginning. We weren't supporting a docent program, so we were really going to be leaning on these visitor services people really heavily, and we need to train them up, but there was no one to do it. So we decided to build this docent training system, which is like a learning management system, but the technology is sort of ancillary just to the fact of wanting to have this really strong core of frontline staff. And then we were like, oh man, well, we probably need a digital asset management system because we've got all this assets, and during construction it's like a deluge of assets, because every day they take hundreds of pictures of the construction site, and then there's event photography, and there's in addition to all of our collection photography. And it would really be better if we could have a digital asset management system, and when you looked someone up in the CRM, it would have pictures of them at the events, and it would provide more images than we can hold in our collection management system, and it would have all this metadata for the website and the app. And then we were like, oh man, Dallas has a loyalty program. We need a loyalty program. And then we were like, oh, we have to do retail too. Okay, so the retail is going to talk to the CRM, is going to talk to the ticketing system, is going to talk to the marketing tools. And then we were like, ah. And so that's what we did for about a year and a half. Meanwhile, the museum was under construction. Construction was continuing apace. The walls started to go up, started to become very real, and then it was done. And in the meantime, we were working in the background on all of this stuff. We put in, I'm going to go through the exact products we ended up selecting, but we reviewed, first we went through this sort of visioning process, what we wanted the experience to be like. Then we sort of got down to brass tacks, evaluating vendors, ticketing vendors, CRM vendors, digital asset management systems, trying to get from them, without having any one system selected, what other systems they would work with. It was really hard to, when you didn't have anything, like normally you're constrained, oh, well, we have this system, it only will work with this other thing, so we're going to have to get this other thing. But, we were very open. We didn't have any legacy data. We didn't have any legacy programs. We didn't have any legacy staff. So it was really open, and it was overwhelming because you didn't have any. People were like, well, what do you want? And you're like, well, everything. So we worked on all of this, and we put our CRM into place, and we've worked very hard on our ticketing system. And here's what we have today. So we have Salesforce as our CRM. We have a ticketing system, which was a custom product development from Story or Area 360. And if you stop by their booth, they have a cute little video about our on-site ticketing process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then we've used ExactTarget for marketing. We moved from MailChimp. We're actually technically still in the process of moving because ExactTarget really ties really, really closely with Salesforce. And the decisions behind Salesforce is a whole other conversation, which we talked about at length last year. But if you do have questions about that, let me know. It was really a desire to take a best-in-breed philosophy so that we could really concentrate, in using systems that are really good at what they do instead of one system that tries to do everything. As well as we don't have fundraising and we don't have membership and we don't have all of these things that most museums have that require kind of a custom system. We continue to use Embark for our collection management system. We developed a new website on Drupal. We have our mobile app, which was also custom. We have a retail system called Teamwork Retail. And we used our staff training system, which is a Litmus, which is a professional development platform. And we do still have email and file sharing and, all those things. This next slide is a mistake, so just pretend like it's not there. Okay. So like I was saying, CRM, we decided on Salesforce. We want to be flexible. We want to be open. One top priority in selecting all of these systems was we always wanted something we were able to get the data out of easily because we knew that eventually we wouldn't be happy with it, wouldn't be working for our needs, or, we would all quit and leave and then next people would come in and be like, what were these people thinking? So we knew that the top priority was ability to get data out and ability to share data between systems. And then, like I said, it was a more for-profit centered focus and features, which is more like how our museum operates than how a traditional museum operates. Marketing. And then this is really cool in that we can take data from our ticketing system in terms of, these people buy tickets for every weekend, but they never come. And we can create a special report on that and create a custom email message out to them. And then all of that data about whether they opened the email or whether they clicked it comes back into their record in the CRM. And so we know who our most engaged visitors are. We know who, always buys tickets and always flakes. And, we don't have to worry about marketing to them as much. And then the potential here is huge, and I don't think we have really grasped it, but, we have built this base I was talking about where eventually, hopefully, we will be able to. We decided to go with a custom ticketing system, which is controversial, but we did know that this would probably be the only time we would ever have an opportunity to take a chance like this and to really spend a lot of time working on getting it right. And we evaluated a bunch of systems, and none of them were quite right. A lot of them were ugly. They didn't have great user experience. They were sort of outdated, or they were overly complex, or they were expensive. So we have free tickets, but a lot of systems you have to pay like $1 processing fee per ticket. So we've sold 380,000 free advance tickets. That would have been a lot of money. And we didn't want to pass that on to the users more for like PR purposes because, Mr. Broad's a billionaire. He has a free museum, but in order to get a ticket, you have to pay a booking fee. What's up with that? And we didn't want to deal with that. So we really wanted to eat that cost. And we were able to negotiate a very cheap rate on free tickets, which is the majority of our tickets. Now, for you, you may have all paid tickets. You may not mind passing that fee on, may not make sense. But for us, it was we knew it was a gamble, but it was worth it to try to get the best we possibly could. And then, again, we want it to be open. We wanted to be able to have this integration with our CRM, and then we wanted to be able to have as seamless as a process on our website as possible. So this isn't fully realized yet, but ideally the website will be, integrated, and you'll just have a single logon for retail and for this, and maybe. So this is what it looks like. How did that go for us? This was the worst day of my life. No, I'm kidding. But it was pretty rough. But in the end, this was, it wasn't a bad thing. It was painful for the day, but, this press came out as actually positive. Like, the Broad's so popular, their thing went down. And then this is my first hate mail. I thought I would share it all with you. Please shoot the person who designed and improved this awful website. Yuck. And then get someone who knows what they're doing. So that was fun. In the end, it's not perfect, and we're still working. We're still adding a lot of features and constantly kind of working on that, but it is better. I'm going to zoom through these, but if you have questions about any particular area, this is a whole lot to go over. Just ask me or get in touch. We decided to do this for our mobile app. We decided to do an iPad-based retail system that also has an open API. we decided to go with kind of this free-form visitor services model where we don't have a desk. We use the Apple Store model. It's very high touch. It's very kind of personalized. They're very highly trained. And the goal is that they are the face of the institution for most people. And so it's really important that they represent the institution for us. This is some press that we got about this strategy in terms of visitor services. And we are doing a whole presentation about that tomorrow if you're still here. Regrets. I would have started earlier, and I would have not spent quite so much time conceptualizing the ideal scenario because it really sneaks up on you. In the last year, it was very fast, and then the development, I think, took a lot longer than originally anticipated. The vendor was like, oh yeah, no problem. We'll have it up for you next week. And then, it turned out to be much more complicated, and ticketing is complicated, and so we would have pushed earlier and harder on that. But in terms of the overall platform, I don't really have regrets on that. I'm still thinking it's going to work out, and it's not quite done and ready and there, but we're going to continue to iterate and work on it as time goes on. And I guess that's it. My time is up. Are there any questions?